What do you get when you put coffee and chocolate together? Mocha. I wanted to do coffee and chocolate because I especially love coffee during the colder months. And you know, chocolate brings a little bit of sweetness to that coffee game. So, you know, let's put them in a cake. There's gonna be layers with frosting and it looks really fancy, but it's not that hard to make. So let me show you. Let's get this cake made. So this is my basic chocolate cake recipe. I altered it slightly to add in some extra coffee flavor. So all of the dry ingredients are gonna go into the bowl, including the cocoa. And I'm just using a natural cocoa powder. You can use whatever you have on hand. If you wanna use black cocoa, that is totally fine as well. Give it a good whisk, and then we're gonna be adding a good, healthy amount of fresh brewed coffee, along with our applesauce and coffee extract. Now I'm just using Trebly, which is a good quality coffee extract. That's my favorite one to use. If you don't have that, then, you know, don't use it. It's totally fine. It's not gonna hurt the cake at all. I just like that extra coffee flavor. Gonna give that a good whisk until it's nice and smooth. You just wanna make sure there's no large lumps. We don't want a lumpy, bumpy batter. So get that nice and mixed. I definitely recommend using a whisk for the task, as it's going to get it the smoothest. I already prepared two 7-inch cake pans with some vegan butter and parchment paper, and I'm just gonna separate it into those two pans, and they are gonna go into my preheated oven. Once they are baked, this takes about 35 to 40 minutes. You wanna let them cool completely, then you can remove them from their pans. Just flip them out onto a drying rack or something like that, and you know, let them cool. You wanna make sure that they are totally ready to go before you try to frost them. But once they're cool, it's time to cut these babies. So I'm using a good serrated blade. You wanna make sure it's serrated because a flat blade is going to tear up the cakes. I'm just taking the domes off the top and then carefully cutting each layer in half. One of my cake layers was a little bit taller than the other, so I just only cut off so much. Just want nice, even cake layers. If you need to use a ruler for this, go ahead, have at it. But once those are cut, I'm just gonna set them aside and get started on the frosting. This is my standard vegan frosting. So into the bowl, it's gonna go the shortening and the sugar, and we're gonna mix that until it becomes thick, but kind of smooth. Yeah, it'll be nice and fluffy and sweet and yeah, like that, exactly. So I took half of my frosting out, and then to this half, I'm adding in some more of that coffee extract. If you just want to use ground espresso powder or something in place of the coffee extract, that's totally fine. You just want to mix it in until it's really nice and combined. Medium speed, let it whip for a couple minutes to get nice and fluffy. Remove that, add in the other half, and then I'm putting in a couple tablespoons again of just more cocoa. Letting that mix on medium speed. You definitely want to let it go for a little bit to knock out any clumps of cocoa powder. Make sure it's nice and smooth. And then at the end, I just add in a little bit more milk because the cocoa powder is a dry ingredient, so it's gonna thicken up that frosting, and you still want it to be nice and smooth and fluffy. So add that in, get it mixed really good. Oh yeah. And by the way, links to everything and the recipe are down in the description. Some of the tools I used to make this cake, that stuff is down below the video. Check that out if you are interested. It's nice and handy. You can just scroll down there, click on stuff, and you're good to go. But oh, look at that. Look at that coffee frosting. Oh yeah. All right, so now we're going to layer up the cake. I'm just using a cake plate on my cake turntable, stick it right to the cake plate. You can use a cake board and then transfer it onto something else later if you like, but I just like this method. And then I'm gonna stack it up with alternating layers of my coffee frosting and my chocolate frosting using a nice offset spatula. I'm just smoothing out the layers so they're nice and even, so when you cut into the cake, it looks pretty, you know, looks professional. That's kind of what I like to see when I cut into a cake. But yeah, so keep layering it up. I just brush off the crumbs a little bit before I put a new layer on, just so I'm not making a huge mess on my cake board or getting a bunch of crumbs into my frosting. You know, that whole jam. Pop that last layer on, and I flipped it upside down so that technically the bottom of the cake is on the top, so that when you cut into the cake, you know, the inside layers are on the inside, if that makes sense. But yeah, so whichever frosting you have more of at this point, go ahead and crumb coat your cake with. Just a nice thin layer on the sides, and then I just, you know, put a thin layer on the top and smooth it out, and then pop it into the refrigerator. Let it chill out for like a half an hour, or you can pop it into the freezer and let it go for like 10 minutes, and then it'll be ready to go again if you're in a hurry. You can also do this the day ahead of time if you want to do cakes over the span of a couple days. That's also an option. My cake is nice and chilled now, so I'm just adding some of the coffee frosting to the bottom half of the cake. Just nice and thick. Get it on there. Oh yeah, that looks delicious. Then I'm smoothing it out with my scraper. You guys, I just use like a putty knife, a 12-inch putty knife that I got at a hardware store and that I washed really, really well. But honestly, it works great, especially if you have tall cakes or anything like that. And it's what I have been using for years to smooth the frosting on my cakes. But once I get that bottom half smooth, go ahead and put the chocolate on top. It's like a little half and half design here. I thought it would look nice. But yeah, you know, put it on generously, and then again, just scrape off the excess and smooth it out. And at this point, if your frostings are blending together, it doesn't matter. Just scrape it back into your frosting bowl because we're gonna do sort of a swirly pattern on top. So if it's a little bit mixed or marbled, that is okay. Just going to put basically the remaining frosting on top. You want the frosting on top to be pretty ample because we're gonna be doing a deep swirl design. If you don't have enough frosting on the top, you won't get the same effect, and you'll probably be able to see the cake underneath when you scrape off the frosting, which, you know, not the best look, not the best. So just give it a little swirly swirl. You can see those are pretty deep swirls, but that was the look I was going for, just cleaning it up around that top edge a little bit. It still looks a little rustic. It's not perfectly smooth, but I wasn't going for perfection here. Then I just dusted the top with a little bit more of that cocoa powder because I thought, you know, why not? You know, whatever. It's just, yeah, why not? But I sliced it using a hot knife, and look at that. Perfect layers, people. Perfect layers. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do consider subscribing to my channel, hitting that like button, the notification bell, and if you want the recipe to this video, that is linked down in the description, as well as some links to the tools that I use to make this cake. And you know, if you want to say hi or talk about the recipe or talk about some other fun baking stuff, hit me up in the comments down below. And finally, you know, there's some other cool videos I have on vegan baking. Just check them out right over here on this side. Right over here. Right there. All right. Thanks so much for hanging out, and I sure do hope to see you again. Bye-bye.